In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and calm streets, there lived a woman named Clara. She wasn't extraordinary in any flashy way. No one would call her famous or rich or particularly adventurous. In fact, most people who knew her thought of her as just Clara, the friendly librarian with glasses that always seemed to sit slightly crooked on her nose. Her days were predictable but peaceful. She woke up early, made breakfast for her two kids, dropped them off at school, and then headed to work at the library. There, she spent hours organizing books, helping students find research materials and occasionally recommending novels to curious readers. But beneath this simple exterior, Clara carried something heavy, a lingering sense of weakness. It wasn't physical pain exactly, though she did feel it sometimes in her shoulders or knees when she bent down to shelve books. No, it was more than that. A few years earlier, Clara had been involved in a minor car accident. Nothing terrible had happened. No one was hurt badly, and the damage to her car was repairable. But ever since that day, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was fragile, vulnerable, like her body might fail her if anything unexpected happened again. Even small things, like slipping on wet pavement or hearing a loud noise, made her heart race. One evening, after tucking her kids into bed, Clara sat alone in her living room, staring at the television without really watching it. Her best friend Lisa had come over earlier that week and noticed how tired Clara looked. "You need to do something for yourself," Lisa had said firmly. "Something that makes you feel strong. Why don't you try martial arts? I heard Brazilian. Jiu-Jitsu is great for building confidence." At first, Clara laughed it off. Martial arts? For her? The idea seemed ridiculous. She hadn't played sports since high school, and even then, she'd only joined the swim team because her mom encouraged her to socialize more. But the seed Lisa planted stayed in Clara's mind, growing bigger each time she thought about how powerless she felt. Finally, one Saturday morning, Clara decided to take action. She found a local dojo offering beginner classes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ. The website promised that anyone could join regardless of age or fitness level. Still, walking through the door of the gym on her first day felt like stepping onto another planet. The air smelled faintly of sweat and rubber mats, and the walls were covered with posters of muscular fighters locked in strange positions. Students moved around the room wearing uniforms called jizz, their belts ranging from white to black, symbolizing their skill levels. Clara felt completely out of place. Her instructor, Marcus, greeted her warmly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that put Clara at ease. "Welcome," he said, shaking her hand. "We're glad to have you here. Don't worry, we'll start slow." His words reassured her, but not everyone shared his welcoming attitude. As Clara tied her borrowed GI belt awkwardly around her waist, she noticed a group of younger students standing nearby. One of them, a lean man with spiky hair and a blue belt around his waist, smirked at her. His name was Jake, and he clearly didn't think much of beginners. "Hey, new girl," Jake called out loudly enough for others to hear. "You sure you're not going to break a nail out here?" His friends chuckled, and Clara felt her cheeks burn. She forced a polite smile, pretending not to care, but inside, she cringed. Was this what she had signed up for? Mockery and judgment? For a moment, she considered leaving right then and there, walking back to her car and never looking back. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of Lisa's encouraging voice telling her to be brave, or maybe it was the tiny flicker of defiance that sparked inside her whenever someone underestimated her. Whatever it was, Clara took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and walked over to join the warm-up exercises. If these people thought she didn't belong, she'd show them otherwise. Not because she wanted to prove them wrong, but because she owed it to herself to try. The warm-ups were harder than she expected. Push-ups, squats, and stretches left her muscles trembling, and she struggled to keep up with the pace. When they moved on to learning basic techniques, Clara felt even more lost. Terms like guard and mount sounded foreign, and trying to mimic the instructor's movements felt clumsy and unnatural. Every time she messed up, Jake snickered under his breath, making sarcastic comments about how cute her attempts were. Clara clenched her fists but refused to let him see her frustration. Instead, she focused intently on Marcus's instructions, determined to absorb every detail. By the end of the class, Clara was exhausted. Her legs ached, her arms felt like jelly, and her pride had taken quite a beating too. Yet despite everything, she couldn't deny the spark of curiosity growing within her. This world of grappling and strategy fascinated her, even if it intimidated her at the same time. As she changed back into her regular clothes and prepared to leave, Marcus approached her. "Not bad for your first day," he said with an approving nod. "It's tough at the beginning, but trust me, you'll get better. Just stick with it." Clara thanked him and stepped outside, where the cool evening air greeted her. She glanced back at the dojo, its lights glowing softly against the darkening sky. Despite the challenges and Jake's obnoxious behavior, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Maybe this wasn't going to be easy, but she realized something important. She didn't want to give up. Not yet. Not until she proved to herself that she could rise above the doubts, both from others and within her own mind. Little did she know, this decision would set her on a path far greater than she could imagine. The weeks that followed Clara's first day at the dojo were anything but easy. Each class felt like a test of her patience, strength, and willpower. The initial excitement of trying something new quickly gave way to the harsh reality of how physically demanding Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ, truly was. Every session left her sore, sweaty, and sometimes frustrated. Basic techniques that looked simple when demonstrated by Marcus or the more experienced students felt nearly impossible for Clara to execute. Rolling, what everyone called sparring, was especially challenging. She often found herself pinned beneath opponents who seemed twice her size, struggling to breathe as they applied pressure to her chest or hips. Despite these struggles, Clara refused to give up. After each class, she would drive home replaying the lessons in her mind, analyzing what went wrong and how she could improve. That night, instead of collapsing onto the couch like she used to, she'd practice drills in her living room. Push-ups became part of her routine, along with stretches to loosen her stiff muscles. She scoured YouTube for instructional videos, watching them over and over until she understood the finer details of moves like hip escapes, guard passes, and submissions. Her children noticed the change in her routine. "Mom, why are you rolling around on the floor?" her youngest son asked one evening, giggling as he watched her attempt to sweep from bottom position. Clara laughed too, though deep down she knew it wasn't just about learning jiu-jitsu. It was about proving to herself that she could grow stronger. Her persistence began to pay off slowly. What started as awkward, clumsy movements gradually became smoother and more controlled. Clara learned to use leverage instead of brute force, realizing that technique mattered far more than sheer strength. One breakthrough moment came during a lesson on escaping side control, a position where an opponent pins you flat on your back. For weeks, Clara had struggled to break free whenever someone heavier held her down. But one evening, Marcus showed the class a subtle detail, using their own weight against them by creating space with precise framing. Clara practiced the movement tirelessly, and during the next roll, she managed to escape successfully for the first time. The sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel her determination even further. Still, no matter how hard she worked, the ridicule never stopped. Jake, in particular, remained relentless. He seemed to take special pleasure in mocking Clara during every class. Whether it was pointing out her mistakes, making sarcastic remarks about her progress, or outright laughing when she got submitted, his behavior grated on her nerves. Other students joined in occasionally, though most kept their distance, either indifferent or uncomfortable with Jake's antics. Clara tried not to let it bother her, but there were days when his words cut deeper than she cared to admit. "You're wasting your time," he said once after she tapped out during a roll. "Maybe stick to knitting or something." What made it worse was that Jake wasn't entirely wrong, at least not in terms of raw skill. Compared to the other students, Clara was still a beginner. She lacked the speed, agility, and technical proficiency they displayed effortly. Watching them flow from one move to the next seamlessly transitioning between attacks and defenses, only highlighted how far behind she was. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering that maybe Jake was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. But then she reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place. Not to impress others, but to reclaim her confidence and prove to herself that she could overcome fear and weakness. One particularly rough evening stood out among the rest. Clara had been paired with Jake for a round of sparring. Normally, instructors avoided matching beginners with higher belts, but Marcus must have thought she was ready for the challenge. From the moment they started, Jake dominated the role. He passed her guard almost immediately, mounted her, and secured side control before she could react. Try as she might, Clara couldn't create enough space to escape. Frustration bubbled inside her as she tapped out yet again, feeling utterly defeated. As they reset, Jake smirked and leaned close enough for only her to hear. "See? Told you this isn't your thing. Stick to yoga, Grandma." For a split second, Clara froze. The nickname stung more than she expected, dredging up memories of all the times people had underestimated her because of her age or appearance. But then something shifted inside her. Instead of shrinking away or letting anger consume her, Clara felt a spark of defiance ignite. She met Jake's smug grin with a steely gaze and replied calmly, "We'll see." Her tone carried a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard, but said nothing more as they resumed the roll. That moment marked a turning point for Clara. Up until then, she had approached jiu-jitsu with a mix of curiosity and trepidation, unsure if she could ever measure up. But now something clicked. She realized that Jake's taunts weren't just insults, they were challenges, and Clara had always risen to challenges, whether it was balancing work and parenting or recovering from the car accident that had shaken her confidence. This was no different. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let anyone dictate her worth, not Jake, not anyone else. If they wanted to doubt her, fine. She'd show them what she was capable of, one step at a time. Clara threw herself into training with renewed focus. She stayed late after classes to drill techniques, asked Marcus for extra pointers, and studied match footage online to learn from professionals. Slowly but surely, her skills improved. She discovered that she had a knack for strategy, anticipating her opponent's moves and countering them effectively. Her guard, once easily passed, became harder to breach. Even her submissions, once laughably weak, grew sharper and more deliberate. While she still lost plenty of rolls, she began winning some too, earning nods of approval from Marcus and quieter students who respected her grit. Jake, however, remained oblivious to the transformation taking place. To him, Clara was still the same awkward beginner who stumbled through basic positions and struggled under pressure. He continued to mock her, unaware that his words no longer held the same power over her. Clara had stopped listening to his jeers long ago. Instead, she channeled her energy into improving herself, knowing that actions spoke louder than insults. Deep down, she wondered what Jake's reaction would be when he finally realized just how much she had grown. But for now, she kept her head down and focused on the mats, determined to keep climbing until she reached the top. Little did she know, her chance to shine was closer than she imagined. As the months rolled by, Clara's dedication to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu (BJJ) transformed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a tentative step toward self-improvement had become a defining part of her life. Her body grew stronger, her movements more fluid, and her understanding of the art deeper. She no longer felt like an outsider at the dojo. Instead, she began to see herself as part of a community, even if some members, like Jake, still treated her with thinly veiled disdain. But despite his constant jabs and sarcastic remarks, Clara found solace in the camaraderie of quieter students who admired her tenacity. They noticed how much effort she put into every class, how she stayed late to drill techniques, and how she never let failure discourage her for long. One evening, just as Clara was adjusting her belt before practice, Marcus gathered everyone at the center of the mat. His voice carried authority, but there was also excitement in his tone. "All right, listen up," he announced, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. Next week, we're hosting a special guest, a black belt from out of town named Diego. He's visiting family nearby and offered to come train with us. We'll have open sparring sessions where you can test yourselves against someone with world-class skills. The room buzzed with anticipation. Black belts were rare visitors, and training with one was both thrilling and intimidating for most students. Clara listened intently, her heart skipping a beat at the thought of rolling with someone so advanced. Marcus continued, "If anyone wants to volunteer for a challenge match against Diego, let me know after class." Challenge matches weren't mandatory. They were opportunities for students to push themselves under controlled conditions, but they were also seen as tests of courage and skill. Clara watched as several higher belts exchanged glances, weighing whether they should step up. Some looked eager, while others hesitated, clearly intimidated by the prospect of facing a seasoned black belt. As Marcus wrapped up his announcement, Clara felt a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension bubbling inside her. After class, a small group of students approached Marcus to express interest in the challenge match. Clara lingered near the edge of the mat, watching silently as names were discussed. Jake, predictably, was among those volunteering. "I've been waiting for something like this," he boasted, flexing his arms dramatically. "Diego won't know what hit him." Clara rolled her eyes but said nothing. She knew Jake well enough by now to recognize that his confidence often exceeded his actual abilities. Still, she couldn't help feeling impressed by his willingness to take on such a daunting opponent. Then, almost without realizing it, Clara heard herself speak. "Can I sign up too?" The words slipped out before she could second-guess them. Everyone turned to look at her, including Marcus, whose eyebrows shot up in surprise. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Jake burst out laughing, drawing stares from other students. "You're serious?" he said, barely containing his amusement. "Clara, this guy eats blue belts for breakfast. What are you gonna do, give him a paper cut?" Clara ignored him, focusing instead on Marcus. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked gently, his expression unreadable. Clara nodded, her resolve firm despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I want to try," she said simply. Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding back. "All right, Clara, you're in." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. Clara threw herself into training harder than ever, drilling techniques she hoped might give her an edge. She focused on fundamentals, knowing that flashy moves wouldn't work against someone as experienced as Diego. Guard retention, framing, and timing became her priorities. During sparring sessions, she visualized scenarios where she might find openings to attack or defend. Every night, she replayed videos of black belts competing, analyzing their strategies and transitions. Her mind raced with possibilities, but she tried to stay grounded, reminding herself that the goal wasn't to win, it was to learn. Finally, the day of Diego's visit arrived. The dojo buzzed with energy as students gathered around the mats, eager to watch the challenge matches. Diego himself was an imposing figure, tall, lean, and radiating calm confidence. He greeted everyone warmly, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries before slipping on his gi. When Marcus introduced him to the group, Diego smiled humbly. "Thanks for having me," he said. "Let's have fun today. I'm here to train, not to dominate. Don't be afraid to push yourselves." The first few matches went smoothly, with Diego demonstrating his expertise while keeping things lighthearted. He submitted each opponent quickly but respectfully, offering tips afterward to help them improve. Clara watched closely, noting how efficient his movements were. There was no wasted motion. Every action served a purpose. When Marcus called her name for the next match, her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. As Clara stepped onto the mat, she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, others skeptical. Jake leaned against the wall, arms crossed, wearing a smug grin. "This is gonna be good," he muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. Clara took a deep breath, blocking out the noise. She shook Diego's hand, meeting his gaze steadily. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm and encouraging. Clara nodded, Ready. The match began, and Diego wasted no time asserting his dominance. He moved swiftly, attempting a takedown within seconds. Clara reacted instinctively, sprawling to maintain her base and avoid being taken down easily. It worked, for now. But once they hit the ground, Diego pressed forward relentlessly, passing her guard and transitioning into side control. Clara felt the familiar pressure bearing down on her ribs, making it hard to breathe. Panic threatened to creep in, but she forced herself to stay calm, recalling Marcus's advice. Focus on survival first, then look for opportunities. Diego shifted, his weight slightly, searching for an opening to secure a submission. That's when Clara saw it, a brief gap in his posture. Without hesitation, she framed with her arms, creating space and turning her hips sharply. In one smooth motion, she swept him off balance, reversing their positions. Now on top, she transitioned into mount position, her legs gripping his torso tightly. Diego adjusted, trying to escape, but Clara maintained control, sensing the momentum shifting in her favor. Then, spotting another opportunity, she locked in an armbar. Time seemed to slow as Clara applied pressure, hyper-aware of every detail. The angle of Diego's elbow, the tension in his muscles, the way his breathing quickened. And then, just like that, he tapped. The sound echoed through the dojo, followed by stunned silence. Clara released the hold immediately, sitting back as reality sank in. Had she really just submitted a black belt? For a moment, no one spoke. Then, applause erupted, breaking the spell. Students cheered loudly, slapping the mats in admiration. Even Diego grinned, extending a hand to congratulate her. That was incredible, he said sincerely. Great technique and timing. You made me pay for getting lazy. Clara blushed, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She glanced towards Jake, whose jaw hung open in disbelief. For once, he had nothing to say. Clara's victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the power of perseverance and belief in oneself. She hadn't set out to prove anything to anyone, least of all Jake. But in that moment, surrounded by cheers and smiles, she realized that she had done exactly that. And yet, as exhilarating as it was, Clara knew this was only the beginning. Her journey in Jiu-Jitsu was far from over, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her next. The aftermath of Clara's stunning victory against Diego rippled through the dojo like a shockwave. What had started as an ordinary training session turned into a moment that no one present would soon forget. As the applause died down and the students returned to their regular drills, whispers about Clara's performance continued to circulate. Some praised her technique, while others marveled at her composure under pressure. Even Marcus, who rarely showed favoritism, couldn't hide his pride. That was textbook jiu-jitsu, he told her later, pulling her aside after class. You stayed calm, stuck to the basics, and capitalized on your opponent's mistake. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. But not everyone reacted with admiration. Jake, in particular, struggled to process what he'd just witnessed. For weeks, he had mocked Clara openly, dismissing her as a hopeless beginner who didn't belong on the mats. Now she had submitted a black belt, a feat that even seasoned blue belts in the dojo hadn't managed to achieve. His ego took a hit, and it showed. He avoided meeting Clara's eyes for the rest of the evening, muttering excuses about needing to leave early before rushing out of the gym. The smug grin that had once been his trademark seemed to vanish overnight. Over the following days, however, something unexpected happened. Instead of sulking or doubling down on his ridicule, Jake approached Clara before class one evening. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by an awkward humility. Hey, Clara, he began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Look, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For all the stuff I said, you proved me wrong, and I respect that. Clara blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected an apology, not from Jake of all people, but she appreciated the gesture nonetheless. It's okay, she replied after a pause, offering him a small smile. I get it. Sometimes people underestimate things they don't understand. Jake nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. Then, hesitating for a moment, he added, Actually, if you're cool with it, maybe you could help me with some guardy. Retention? You seemed really solid out there and I could use some pointers. Clara raised an eyebrow, amused by the irony of Jake asking her for advice. Still, she agreed without hesitation. After all, jiu-jitsu wasn't about holding grudges. It was about growth, both individually and collectively. Word of Clara's achievements spread beyond the dojo walls, earning her a newfound respect within the local martial arts community. Other students began seeking her guidance, especially beginners who saw her as proof that anyone could succeed with enough determination. Parents of younger kids enrolled in the youth program started mentioning Clara as an example of perseverance, telling their children, if she can do it, so can you. Clara found herself becoming something of a mentor, patiently explaining techniques and sharing tips with those eager to learn. It was a role she embraced wholeheartedly, finding joy in helping others overcome their own struggles. Her confidence soared, not just on the mats, but in every aspect of her life. At the library, she noticed that she spoke up more during meetings, advocating for ideas she believed in, rather than staying quiet to avoid conflict. With her kids, she became firmer yet kinder, setting boundaries while encouraging them to pursue their passions. Even mundane tasks like grocery shopping felt different. She carried herself with a quiet assurance that hadn't been there before. Jiu-Jitsu had taught her far more than how to defend herself. It had shown her the value of resilience, patience, and self-belief. Yet despite her growing reputation, Clara remained humble. She knew better than anyone that her journey was far from over. Submitting a black belt was an incredible milestone, but it didn't mean she had mastered the art. If anything, it fueled her desire to keep improving. She threw herself into training with renewed vigor, attending extra classes and participating in regional tournaments whenever possible. Her progress was steady, marked by incremental victories and occasional setbacks, but each experience, whether triumphant or humbling, taught her something new. One day, several months after her match with Diego, Clara earned her first stripe on her white belt. It was a small yet meaningful recognition of her hard work, symbolizing her transition from a raw beginner to someone who understood the fundamentals. When Marcus tied the thin piece of tape around her belt during class, the entire dojo erupted into applause. Clara beamed, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. She glanced at Jake, who clapped enthusiastically alongside the others and gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to supportive, a testament to the transformative power of mutual respect. Clara's transformation extended beyond technical skill. She developed a deep appreciation for the philosophy behind jiu-jitsu, the idea that strength lies not in overpowering others, but in adapting to challenges and using leverage to turn disadvantages into opportunities. This mindset seeped into her daily life, shaping how she handled stress, solved problems, and interacted with people. Whether navigating a difficult conversation at work or calming a tantrum-prone toddler at home, she applied the same principles of patience and strategy that guided her on the mats. By the time her first anniversary of starting jiu-jitsu rolled around, Clara was barely recognizable as the timid woman who had walked into the dojo a year earlier. Physically, she was stronger and fitter, her muscles toned and her posture confident. Mentally, she exuded a quiet determination that inspired those around her. Emotionally, she radiated a sense of peace, knowing that she had faced her fears head-on and emerged victorious, not because she had conquered others, but because she had conquered herself. Still, Clara refused to let success go to her head. She reminded herself often that jiu-jitsu was a lifelong journey, one where mastery was less about reaching a destination and more about embracing the process. There would always be tougher opponents, harder lessons, and moments of doubt. But she welcomed these challenges, viewing them not as obstacles but as opportunities to grow. After all, it was the struggle itself, the grit and grind that made the victories worthwhile. As she stood on the mat one evening, watching newer students stumble through basic drills, Clara reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the fear and uncertainty she had felt during her first class, the sting of Jake's taunts, and the countless hours spent practicing alone in her living room. Those memories weren't painful anymore. They were reminders of her resilience. They proved that even the most unlikely heroes could rise above adversity with enough heart and determination. And so, Clara continued forward, one step at a time. She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd earn her blue belt, compete in higher-level tournaments, or inspire others to follow in her footsteps. But she did know one thing for certain. She was no longer the same person who had walked into the dojo a year ago. She was stronger, braver, and infinitely more capable than she had ever imagined. And that realization, more than any belt or trophy, was the greatest reward of all. Clara's journey in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ, wasn't just about mastering techniques or earning stripes on her belt. It was a story of transformation, both personal and communal. As the months turned into years, she continued to grow, not only as a martial artist but also as a leader within the dojo. Her presence became a cornerstone of the gym, a source of inspiration for beginners and seasoned practitioners alike. What had once been a place where she felt out of place now felt like home, a sanctuary where she could challenge herself, connect with others, and celebrate shared victories. One of the most profound changes Clara noticed was how her relationships with fellow students evolved. Jake, who had once mocked her relentlessly, transformed into one of her closest training partners. Their dynamic shifted from adversarial to collaborative, built on mutual respect and trust. Jake admitted that watching Clara submit Diego had forced him to reevaluate his attitude, not just toward her, but toward the sport itself. "You made me realize I was focusing too much on being tough instead of actually learning," he confessed, during a post-training chat. "Thanks for showing me what real jiu-jitsu looks like." Their friendship deepened over time, with Jake often crediting Clara for helping him refine his guard game. Together, they pushed each other to new heights, challenging one another in roles while offering constructive feedback afterward. It was a testament to how BJJ brought people together, breaking down barriers and fostering connections that transcended initial judgments. Even Marcus commented on their partnership, calling them the dynamic duo of the dojo. Beyond Jake, Clara found herself mentoring countless newcomers. Each week, fresh faces joined the ranks of white belts, wide-eyed and unsure, much like she had been when she first started. These students looked up to Clara, seeing her as living proof that perseverance could overcome doubt and fear. She took this responsibility seriously, dedicating extra time to guide them through the basics: how to survive in bad positions, how to breathe during intense roles, and how to stay patient when progress seemed slow. Her advice always came wrapped in kindness and encouragement. "It's not about being perfect," she'd say. "It's about showing up every day and giving your best effort." Her impact extended beyond the mats as well. Clara's confidence spilled over into every corner of her life. At the library, she spearheaded initiatives to create reading programs for underprivileged children, drawing inspiration from her own experiences of feeling underestimated. Her colleagues marveled at her newfound assertiveness, noting how she navigated challenges with calm determination. At home, her kids began to emulate her resilience, tackling school projects and sports with renewed enthusiasm. "Mom, you're like a superhero," her youngest son declared one evening after hearing her recount a particularly grueling tournament match. Clara laughed, brushing off the compliment, but secretly, it warmed her heart. Yet despite all her accomplishments, Clara remained grounded. She knew better than anyone that growth never came without setbacks. There were days when injuries sidelined her, forcing her to sit out classes while others trained. There were tournaments where she lost matches decisively, leaving her frustrated and questioning her abilities. And there were moments when self-doubt crept back in, whispering that maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. But each time she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned. Failure was part of the process, and true strength lay in getting back up again. One pivotal moment came nearly 2 years after her infamous match with Diego. Clara stood at the center of the mat, surrounded by her peers, as Marcus tied a blue belt around her waist. The room erupted into applause, cheers echoing off the walls. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she absorbed the magnitude of the moment. Earning a blue belt was no small feat. It marked the transition from beginner to intermediate practitioner, a milestone that represented thousands of hours of sweat, sacrifice, and dedication. As she scanned the crowd, she saw familiar faces smiling back at her. Jake, who gave her a thumbs up, younger students who clapped enthusiastically, and even Lisa, her best friend, who had driven an hour just to witness the ceremony. That night, celebrating with friends and family at a local cafe, Clara reflected on her journey. She thought about the shy, uncertain woman who had walked into the dojo 2 years earlier, carrying nothing but a borrowed GI and a fragile sense of self-worth. She thought about the ridicule she had endured, the countless hours spent drilling, techniques, and the exhilaration of submitting Diego in 14 seconds. Most of all, she thought about how far she had come, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. But Clara knew this wasn't the end of her story. In fact, it felt more like the beginning of a new chapter. With her blue belt secured, she set her sights on loftier goals, competing in national tournaments, refining advanced techniques, and perhaps one day earning the coveted purple belt. Yet these ambitions weren't driven by ego or a desire for recognition. They stemmed from a deeper motivation, the love of the art itself. Jiu-Jitsu had become more than just a hobby. It was a way of life, a philosophy that guided her actions, both on and off the mats. As the years passed, Clara's influence continued to ripple outward. She began teaching beginner classes at the dojo, sharing her knowledge with the next generation of students. Her teaching style was patient yet firm, emphasizing fundamentals over flashiness and humility over arrogance. Many of her students went on to achieve great things themselves, crediting Clara for instilling in them the values of discipline and perseverance. Some even followed in her footsteps, earning their own blue belts and inspiring others along the way. Through it all, Clara never forgot why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't to prove anything to anyone. Not Jake, not the doubters, not even herself. It was simply to reclaim a piece of herself that she had lost after the car accident, to rediscover her strength and courage in the face of adversity. And, in doing so, she had uncovered something far greater, a community, a purpose, and a lifelong passion. Years later, when Clara finally earned her black belt, a dream she hadn't dared to imagine in those early days, she stood on the mat once, again surrounded by cheering voices. This time, however, the celebration wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had supported her along the way. Marcus, who had believed in her potential, Jake, who had grown alongside her, and the countless students whose lives she had touched. As she bowed deeply to the group, gratitude swelling in her chest, Clara realized that the greatest victory of all wasn't the belts or titles. It was the connections she had forged and the legacy she had built. And so, Clara's story served as a reminder to anyone who dared to take the first step toward change. Greatness isn't reserved for the naturally gifted or the fearless. It belongs to those who show up day after day, willing to face their fears and embrace the grind. For Clara, the mats had been her battlefield, her classroom, and ultimately, her salvation. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she faced them with the same quiet resolve that had carried her this far. Because in the world of jiu-jitsu, and in life itself, the fight is never truly over.